I sit, for the second time in my life, on the back of a Terran landspeeder, being piloted by one of my crew's mothers. My mate, my child, my Saha subordinate, and her Terran boyfriend have all remained at the longhouse we slept at since arriving, which is understandable, after what happened when we arrived the other day. Below us is a massive palisade enclosure of hewn wood. The landscape is buried under a 30-centimeter blanket of snow. The sheer variety of habitats that humans can inhabit and traverse is one of the things that makes garden worlders so incredibly reluctant to admit that they are a single species. After all, one species surely cannot naturally live both in sun-baked desert and icy tundra. The wooden wall sits in an area of flat land, with forests of Fennoscandian trees growing nearby. In the distance, mountains loom beneath grey skies. Approaching the fortress is an army of Terrans, dressed in armour and armed with weapons used nearly 2,000 years ago. In this force I see Victor, standing tall and looking like a true warrior. Most of the other Triple M's are with him. Apparently there's a constant problem finding enough volunteers to fill out the non-Norse sides of these reenactments. A few contingents of the opposing force are stood outside and act as if they had been taken by surprise. They are quickly set upon and slaughtered. If you'd asked the woman I was at 16, she would likely have guessed that a Terran performance such as this, if it occurred at all, would have required the real slaughter of whoever was lucky enough to be slaughterable. After all, she would have reasoned, they are savage deathworlders. The reality is much more mundane. In actuality, while their arms may look ancient, they are in fact very modern, each containing a mild shock battery. When a reenactor is hit by a weapon, if they feel it electrify them, they fall into the snow and play dead. A side effect of the general hardiness of Terrans is that, for the most part, their bodies are very resistant to electric shock. Even their brains, massively more delicate than the rest of them and more like garden mortar flesh than deathworlder, can withstand enormous currents being passed through them. Their single hearts, on the other hand, are extremely susceptible to electricity. This is due to the fact that, unlike most species, Terran muscles can only contract, great for strength, terrible for writing every chamber of your heart being contracted at once. Even a small shock is enough to induce cardiac arrest if passed through them. I have been assured that the current is not strong enough to pose a risk to life, but still, playing with something you are so sensitive to, much less subsequently lying in the snow for prolonged periods, does seem like the foolhardiness of a deathworlder to me. A man steps forth from beside Victor. He wears a golden crown. Apparently he plays Aethelred, the king of the approaching force. Yes, seemingly, there was a time when not only did Terrans submit themselves to monarchy, but monarchs were expected to serve on the front lines of battle. Something unique to them, of all the martial species. Victor was apparently offered the part of Aethelred, but turned it down, not believing he would be able to do it justice. He plays instead the part of Aethelred's brother, Alfred, who will later either become the first king of a united England, or become the grandfather to the first, Athelstan, depending on who you wish to listen to. In this battle, however, Alfred is a much less active part, and thus, Victor was much more happy to accept it. This is a lot of history to retain. "Jobnyab! Hogatu! Get slap!" screams the king towards the palisade. The gate is kicked open. There stands a giant woman, wearing a helmet and a quilted gambeson, bearing a wooden shield and with an unnervingly large axe, flanked by her 2.2-meter blue-skinned daughter, and the Uplift, of whom she acted as the unwilling male bride the other night. "Till Vakor!" screams the wife of the woman, to whose back I cling, raising her axe into the air before swinging it forward to, menacingly, hold it at shoulder height. "Bilskab!" bellows the king of the opposing force. A resounding roar comes up from both sides as they sprint towards each other, in a ground-borne charge. The animalistic ferocity these Terrans exhibit is enough to, momentarily, put me back into the mindset I had before I crash-landed my fighter on a Terran-held world, and rather than being eaten, or at the very least summarily executed the way I expected to be, I was surrendered and had my wounds treated by Terran medics. It seems impossible that it's only a few millennia that separate modern Terrans from Terrans who fought like this. That this is the same species as those medics that more than anyone else, brought about the peace by showing everyone that these were deeply kind and compassionate creatures. That kindness and compassion is completely absent from sight right now. The warriors collide and the air rings out with the clang and clatter of ancient Terran weapons against ancient Terran shields. Every one of them truly look as if they are generally trying to hack each other apart to me. I feel the woman's back, that I cling to, rise and fall in mirth. "Something funny, Mrs. Arundottir?" I query wearily.
"Just my wife's axe."
"Your wife's axe? What's so funny about that?"
"It's just, she's so fussy about historical accuracy, but that axe she excuses because of the rule of cool."
I look at the weapon, currently being swung into the side of a Terran, with bone-cracking momentum. "That's not a historically accurate weapon?" I ask. She wobbles her head.
"It's really more of a stylized wood-cutting executioner's axe. It's too long and hefty to really be used effectively as a one-handed axe, the way she uses it, but it's too short and still too hefty to be a particularly effective two-hander. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you that it's plausible, not out of the question that someone somewhere had an axe like that made and used it in battle. She would also point out that the fact is she is a strong woman, much taller and stronger than average today and certainly historically, thus making it less unreasonable for her to use that kind of axe since it's less exhausting for her than for others. But she does also admit that she just prefers the look of that one to a more historically accurate ones."
I chitter. "You're rather well informed about ancient battle axes." She laughs.
"It helps that I am one."
Making a joke that my translator notifies me is self-depreciating.
Actually, it's often been married to her for more than a century. Without her, I would never be the kind of woman who could tell you the first thing about Dark Age battle axes. That woman just has such infectious enthusiasm that I don't mind listening to her prattle on for hours about ancient weaponry. Though if you don't mind receiving lengthy lectures, I'd follow Auntie Heidi's 3 rules for harmonious coexistence with a Georgian historian.
"And what are these 3 rules, Auntie Heidi?" I query wryly.
1, she says, extending a single digit over her shoulder. "Loki and Por are not brothers."
Alright, that shan't be a problem for me, as I wasn't aware that anyone erroneously thought that until just now. What's rule 2?
She extends a second counting digit. 2. Never use Viking as a synonym for the Norse language, religion, culture, or people. In fact, I try to avoid the word entirely.
Alright, what does Viking mean if not these things? I ask, having heard the word but not learned its meaning previously.
Like pirate, raider, reaver, voyager?
And why would I use that word as a stand-in for an entire culture? I ask, confused.
She shrugs and puffs mirthfully. Because there was a time in history when our ancestors did a lot of piracy for a few centuries. The economy became pretty reliant on it. Entire colonial kingdoms were built off of the back of it. The association stuck, but it's a reductive one.
I'll bear that in mind. Rule 3?
A third counter is extended. Rule number 3, and this is the most important rule, never, and I mean never, mention horned helmets.
Horned?
Horned helmets are her biggest pet peeve. She will rant about them for hours if you give her the slightest provocation.
You mean like the one you wore the other night? I ask quizzically. If her wife hates these things that much, then it seems needlessly antagonistic to wear one.
No, not like that one. That one's decorative, and she lets me get away with it because Loki isn't usually depicted as a warrior. It's horned battle helmet she hates.
And why? It seems unlikely to be merely a matter of taste.
You see, says the woman, doing a rather good impression of her wife, if I don't strap a horned helmet to my head, then what the horn is a massive lever for anyone who doesn't want me to be wearing a helmet. Like whoever I'm fighting to aim for, to knock it off my head. If I do strap it to my head, then what I've then given my enemy is a handle to use to manipulate my head down to throat-cutting height.
She mimes taking hold of a horn, wresting the person it's attached to and cutting their throat before returning to her usual voice to say,
"Yeah, so if you're in the mood to have what I just explained again, only this time in 74,000 words, then I encourage you to bring it up with her."
Noted. I'll only bring it up if I'm truly in the mood to die of either boredom or terror without a strong preference to which. This elicits a hearty chuckle. I turn away from the battle and instinctively scan the horizon. Then I notice something. Something odd. Mrs. Arundot here?
Oh, call me Heidi, sweetheart, she chirps cheerfully.
All right, Heidi, I respond distractedly.
Yes?
What's making those trees move like that, to our back left? I feel her body tense in a way that reminds me that she's just as much a death order as those below us. She whips her head behind herself to look to where I indicated. A look of horror adorns her face as she returns it to the front, leans forward and, activating voice amplification, barks a single untranslatable word 3 times, instantly stopping the noise and the fighting, replacing them with an eerie still. Troll! Troll! Troll!